In the glass tower at the heart of Manhattan, Adelaide Montgomery slammed her hand down on the polished boardroom table so hard the sound echoed across the empty room. "Everyone is fired." Her words hung in the cold air like a verdict. A moment earlier the room had been filled with security officers and executives. Now the door had closed behind them, leaving only silence and the quiet patter of rain against the tall windows. Montgomery Dynamics Tower rose 68 stories above the financial district. Its walls of glass reflected the gray autumn sky, turning clouds into shifting mirrors. Inside, the white LED lighting gave everything a sterile glow. On the 58th floor, Adelaide Montgomery stood alone in the boardroom, the youngest CEO the company had ever had. She was 30 years old, her blonde hair pulled tightly back, her red dress sharp and precise. Her expression carried the same hardness that had just cost dozens of people their jobs. The company was in crisis. 6 months earlier, her father, Charles Montgomery, had suffered a stroke. The man who built Montgomery Dynamics, a global leader in advanced aerospace technology and defense systems, had been forced to step away from the company he loved. Adelaide had stepped in. The media called her ruthless. The board called her inexperienced. The investors called her risk. And now, a catastrophic code leak threatened a government contract worth more than $4 billion. So Adelaide had done what she believed strong leaders did. She eliminated every possible threat. She had dismissed the entire security division. Control, she believed, meant removing weakness. But control also came with consequences. Adelaide stood by the window, staring down at the rainy streets far below. Cars crawled through traffic like glowing insects. The city never stopped moving, even when lives inside its towers were falling apart. She barely noticed when the door opened again. A janitor stepped inside. He pushed a battered mop bucket and carried an old yellow caution sign under his arm. His uniform was simple and worn, the kind most executives never even noticed. He bent down quietly, placing the sign on the marble floor. Wet floor. Adelaide turned, irritated. "Come back later," she said sharply. The man didn't argue. He simply continued his work, calm and silent, as though her anger meant nothing to him. Then Adelaide's heel caught the edge of her briefcase. The marble floor was slick. Her balance vanished. She reached the table, but she was already falling. The janitor moved faster than she expected. His hand shot forward, catching her elbow before she hit the ground. His grip was strong but careful, steadying her until she regained her balance. For a moment, they stood close enough that Adelaide could see the lines around his eyes, deep creases carved by years of hardship and quiet patience. He stepped back immediately, saying nothing. That was when something slipped from his shirt pocket. A small bronze object hit the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Adelaide bent down and picked it up before he could reach it. It was a medal. The bronze surface was worn, its ribbon faded with age, but the engraving was still readable. "For valor in the face of enemy fire. Kandahar Province." Below that was a name. Charles Montgomery. Her father's name. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She looked up slowly at the janitor. "Wait," she said. Her voice had lost its sharp edge. "This medal, it has my father's name on it." The man paused. His broad shoulders stiffened slightly beneath the thin fabric of his uniform, but he didn't turn around. "It belongs to him," he said quietly. His voice was low and calm, the kind of voice that carried the weight of difficult memories. "I was planning to return it." Adelaide felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack forming in the wall she had spent years building around herself. "Who are you?" she asked. But the man had already started moving again, pushing the mop bucket toward the door. "My name doesn't matter," he said. And then he left. Adelaide stood there for several seconds, staring at the medal in her hand. She had no idea that the quiet janitor who had just walked away had once saved her father's life. And she certainly had no idea he was about to save her company too. His name was Henry Lawson. He was 36 years old and lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn with his 7-year-old daughter, Ella. Ella loved music. Every afternoon she practiced piano, tapping the rhythm carefully with her fingers as she counted the notes. She was bright and curious, the kind of child who asked endless questions about the world. Henry adored her. Before Ella was born, Henry's life had been very different. He had once been an aerospace engineer, one of the best structural integrity specialists working on military aircraft systems. His career had taken him overseas to support defense operations in Afghanistan. That was where everything changed. One afternoon in Kandahar province, a convoy vehicle struck an improvised explosive device. The explosion flipped the vehicle and sent flames roaring into the desert air. Inside the wreckage was a visiting defense contractor, Charles Montgomery. Henry didn't think. He ran straight into the burning wreck. Charles had been unconscious, his leg pinned beneath twisted metal. Smoke filled the vehicle, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Henry used a metal pen in his pocket to create an emergency airway so Charles wouldn't suffocate. Then he dragged the man out of the fire. Gunfire cracked in the distance, but Henry stayed with him until medics arrived. Charles Montgomery survived. Henry walked away with minor injuries and memories that never left him. After the war, Henry tried to return to engineering, but the sound of machinery reminded him too much of explosions. The pressure of high-stakes work felt unbearable. "I should go. My dad will be waiting." She turned toward the door. "Thank you again, Miss Montgomery." And then she was gone. The office felt strangely empty. Adelaide sat slowly in her chair and stared at the metal again. Who was Henry Lawson? And why did every piece of information about him feel like a mirror, showing her something she didn't want to see about herself? She didn't have long to think. That afternoon, the door opened and the chief financial officer stepped inside. Damian Cross. He was 40 years old, tall and razor-thin, with pale skin and slick blonde hair. His gray suit was perfectly tailored, and the diamond-studded watch on his wrist sparkled beneath the office lights. Damian smiled the way a chess player smiles when he knows the game is almost over. "Adelaide," he said smoothly, "we have a problem." She looked up. "What kind of problem?" "I believe we've identified the person responsible for the security breach." Adelaide's stomach tightened. "Who?" Damian placed a tablet on the desk and turned the screen toward her. Server logs filled the display. Timestamps, access records, maintenance terminal activity. At the bottom of the log was a name. Henry Lawson. Adelaide's chest went cold. "This shows unauthorized access to the server room last night." Damian said calmly, "Your janitor appears to have been tampering with the network." The room felt suddenly smaller. Adelaide stared at the evidence. The timestamps were real. The access logs were real. But something about it didn't feel right. Henry had saved her from falling. He carried her father's medal. And his daughter had come here just to say thank you. "Are you sure?" Adelaide asked. Damian's smile widened slightly. "The evidence is clear. I recommend immediate suspension and a full investigation." Adelaide looked back at the screen. Then she thought about the board, the media, the government contract worth billions. Control, authority, power. "Suspend him," she said quietly, "and confiscate anything he brought into the building." Damian nodded, satisfied. An hour later, Henry Lawson was escorted out of Montgomery Tower by internal security. They took his badge. They took his keys. And they took the medal, sealing it inside an evidence bag. Henry didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply nodded calmly. As he walked to the lobby, he saw Ella waiting near the entrance the way she always did after school. When she saw the security guard beside him, her smile disappeared. "Dad," she whispered. Henry knelt down in front of her and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "Sometimes people make mistakes." "But they took your medal," Ella said through tears. "They took Grandpa Charles's medal." Henry pulled her into a hug. "The medal doesn't make me who I am," he said quietly. "You do." They left the building together, walking hand in hand into the rain. That night, Adelaide couldn't sleep. Her penthouse apartment felt too large and too silent. She paced the living room, replaying the day over and over. Ella's voice echoed in her mind. "My dad says you're very kind." The words felt like an accusation. Finally, Adelaide did something she hadn't done since her father's stroke. She unlocked the door to his private study. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Stacks of notebooks covered the desk. Journals her father had written for decades. Adelaide hesitated. Then she opened one. The entries were scattered thoughts about business, family, and philosophy. But one entry stopped her cold. It was dated nearly 15 years earlier. Today I met a young engineer who saved my life. His name is Henry Lawson. Adelaide's hands began to tremble as she read. He pulled me from a burning vehicle in Kandahar. Used a pen to keep my airway open while gunfire continued. He refuses recognition. Refuses medals. But if this company ever needs someone who sees problems others miss, it needs people like Henry. Then came the line that made Adelaide's breath catch. If you ever meet him, Adelaide, trust him, even if he's carrying a mop. Adelaide closed the journal slowly. Her heart pounded. She had made a terrible mistake. If Henry accessed the servers, it might not have been sabotage. It might have been protection. She grabbed her phone. I need Henry Lawson's address, she told her assistant. Tonight. 2 hours later, Adelaide stood outside a small apartment building in Brooklyn. Rainwater glistened on the sidewalks beneath the streetlights. She climbed the narrow staircase and knocked on the third-floor door. Henry opened it. He wore jeans and a simple T-shirt. He didn't look surprised to see her. Miss Montgomery, he said calmly. I need to talk, Adelaide replied. Henry stepped aside. The apartment was small but neat. Ella slept on the couch under a blanket. A piano stood quietly in the corner. Adelaide sat at the kitchen table. I read my father's journal, she said. She placed a medal on the table between them. He wrote about you. Henry looked at the medal but didn't touch it. You did what you thought was right, he said. No, Adelaide said quietly. I did what I thought was safe. She swallowed. Did you access the server room last night? Yes. Why? Because someone installed a backdoor in your network. Henry explained everything calmly. The hidden device, the data siphoning, the logs he recorded, the report he sent. Adelaide felt shame burning in her chest. I accused a man who saved my father, she whispered. Henry shrugged slightly. I'm just a janitor. No one would believe me. You're not just anything, Adelaide said firmly. You saved my father, and you tried to save my company. She leaned forward. Help me fix this. Henry glanced at Ella sleeping nearby. What about my daughter? I'll make sure she's taken care of, Adelaide said. School, time, everything. Henry thought for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but we do it quietly. They shook hands. For the first time in months, Adelaide felt something she thought she had lost. Hope. For 3 days they worked in secret. Henry traced digital breadcrumbs through the company's systems. Adelaide kept the board distracted. What they discovered was shocking. The backdoor was an outside attack. It was internal. The data trail led to a hidden account with executive-level permissions, CFO-level permissions. Damian Cross. Henry set up a trap, a honeypot server filled with fake sensitive files. Damian couldn't resist. He accessed it immediately using his credentials. Every keystroke was logged. Security cameras even captured the reflection of his diamond watch on the computer screen during the data transfer. The evidence was undeniable. The next morning, the boardroom was filled with shareholders and journalists. Damian stood confidently at the front. Adelaide entered with Henry beside her. Damian's smile faltered. Before we begin, Adelaide said, I have something to show you. She played a video. Military footage filled the screen. A burning vehicle in the desert. A soldier pulling a man from the flames. The man being rescued was Charles Montgomery. The soldier was Henry Lawson. This man saved my father's life 15 years ago, Adelaide said. And last week he saved his company. She clicked again. Server logs, security footage, financial records, and finally an audio recording of Damian negotiating payment with a competitor. The room erupted. FBI agents entered and arrested Damian Cross for corporate espionage. As he was led away in handcuffs, the boardroom fell silent. Then someone began clapping. Soon the entire room applauded. Adelaide turned to Henry and held up the medal. This belongs to you. Henry shook his head gently. My world is quieter than this, he said. I just want to go home. Adelaide smiled. Then let me make sure your daughter gets the future she deserves. Henry nodded. 3 weeks later, Montgomery Tower looked different. The cold lobby had been transformed. Warm lights, wooden benches, a grand piano in the center. Inside a glass case were two objects, a mop and a bronze medal. The plaque read, "In honor of those who see what others miss." Ella sat at the piano playing a simple melody. Children from across the city listened. It was part of a new scholarship program Adelaide had created. Henry stood quietly in the back, now working as a safety advisor for the company. Still humble, still avoiding the spotlight. Adelaide stood beside him, watching the children. The company had begun to change. People listened more. They looked beyond titles. They valued the people who quietly fixed small mistakes. As the sun set over Manhattan, Adelaide paused beside the glass case. She thought about her father, about the lesson she had almost ignored. Sometimes we are saved by people we never expect, and sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones who finally learn to see them.